I'm not even going to lie to you. I knew when Canelo asked Bud, who have you fought? You haven't fought any great fighters. Yeah, I'm going to be the great fighter that you fight. I knew right then during those media conferences that Bud was going to put hands and feet on him. I seen it in his eyes. He looked at him like, say no more. And to be honest with you, Canelo, he put on a masterclass. Say no more. Welcome back to Say No More Media. Don't forget to click that notification bell and subscribe to the channel. Let's get straight into today's video. Terence Bud Crawford just solidified his legacy in boxing history amongst the greats by beating an all-time great in Canelo Alvarez. This was one of the greatest matchups that we have anticipated, possibly since Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao. I mean, the anticipation building up to this fight. Shout out to 70,000 fans selling out Allegiant Stadium. I knew so many of my friends and comrades that were in the building for this legendary night. And you can see straight out the gate, it was Mexican Pride Heritage Weekend. You know, Bud showed up, showed up and showed support right out the gate, came out to the music, showing homage, even brought out the guitar. That's a part of the heritage. Canelo, you already know all fans are behind him. You know how the Canelo crowd rocks. They show major support for Canelo. All Canelo fans, they rocking win, lose, or draw, and you can't have nothing but respect for that. And Canelo came in here. He looked bulky. He looked ready. Look at him. He had filled up. Pause. Since the weigh-in, he looked way bigger than Crawford as far as eye test goes. But, man, round one, straight out the gate, the first couple of rounds, they were feeling each other out, but Terence Crawford immediately came out and established that he could take a punch from Canelo. Because we all knew Bud Crawford was an underdog in this fight, and everybody wanted to see if he was going to be able to handle Canelo's power. Canelo was using a lot of feints early. He was setting up a lot of his shots, and he landed early. Shout out to Canelo. He did land early, but I think what Bud did was let him land to show him that, hey, I could take these shots. I could move up to 168 and be able to take shots from you. But the thing that could surprise Canelo was how hard that Terence Crawford was able to punch and carry up across these weight classes. And he was stunning Canelo. He was catching him with some very clean shots. They had some very good exchanges. But at times when Bud Crawford stood in the pocket with Canelo and they exchanged, he was obviously getting the better hand of him coming out of those exchanges. As you see right there, Canelo didn't expect that type of power from Bud Crawford. That was probably the meme of the century right there. He turned and looked like, hey, hold on. He ain't supposed to be hitting this hard at 168 because Bud's coming up from 147, 154. He started his career at 135. And, I ain't gonna lie. Canelo Alvarez, it was a master chess match. It was a great showing on two legendary superstars, Hall of Famers in the boxing community. And what Bud Crawford did out of that southpaw stance is he neutralized everything that Canelo Alvarez loves to do. He loves to set up those check hooks. He loves to throw those feints. He loves to counter. So how do you beat a counter puncher? You sit in the pocket with him, and you also learn, you use your jabs, use your feints, and get up out of there and don't get cornered in the ring. So I think the biggest tell of this fight was how frustrated Canelo was and how Bud was just laughing, and he was playing the psychological games with, Canelo Alvarez as well when he was going to his corner. They kept telling him, hey, you're boxing him, you're outthinking him, you're boxing him. And this all started back to the press conference when Canelo Alvarez said that Terence Bud Crawford was scared of him, and Terence had to let it be known straight out the gate, I'm not scared of nothing. I'm not scared of nobody. And it really showed in the face-to-face when, Bud walked him down, walked him back up because, everything is telling in the face-offs and the interviews what they say. And I think people misunderstood how big Bud Crawford really is. Pause. That was crazy. But he probably walks around at 170, 180 on any given day. So him coming down to 168, I didn't think Canelo was that much bigger than him as physicality, as a bigger man. Yeah, I mean, in the ring, it looks like it, but don't get me wrong, as far as stature and everything, Canelo Alvarez was bigger in the ring, but as far as longer reach, Bud got that, And as far as punching power, I think they came in a little equivalent as far as their power punches. So I think it all set up for a great match between what we witnessed, this past weekend. And honestly, to be real with you, I know Vegas was crazy as far as, Bud was the underdog. It wasn't expected for him to win. Everything was, can he handle Canelo's power? Is he able to take a punch at 168 because of his previous fight with Madrimov? But what Terence Bud Crawford was able to do out there, straight out of Omaha, Nebraska, he was able to reset the story of, the inner city boxer, the boxer from America, from the inner city. That story is still a legacy in boxing. So many stories have been, all these foreign fighters and everybody coming over and their legacies are being pushed. But what about, the inner city kid that overcame everything in order to, make it for his family and make it out, So shout out to Bud Crawford, man. Shout out to what he was able to do against Canelo Alvarez. It was nothing short of a masterclass. And, he stood in there and he took them shots from Canelo, and it started getting frustrated from Canelo. You seen the headbutt. You seen he was starting hitting him on top of his head. You could just see Canelo flustered, anytime they sat in there and exchanged with each other. It was very frustrating for Canelo. And let's just go over Crawford's legacy. With him beating Canelo Alvarez right now, he just became, one of the first people to ever cross 3 divisions and become, a world champion in 3 different divisions, as far as welterweight, super middleweight, and he is recognized as the undisputed champion in the light welterweight and welterweight divisions, and now in the super middleweight division. That's something that's never been done in history, and he's undefeated, the undefeated champion. He's the first male boxer in history to achieve undisputed championship statuses in both light welterweight divisions during the 4-belt era. And that includes holding the WA, IBF, WBO, and WBC titles all at the same time. He's undefeated with a record of 41 wins, 31 of those coming by knockout, and he has never been knocked down in a fight. And no judge has ever scored a bout against him. Maybe until this past Canelo fight, And Crawford showed major respect. Canelo and Crawford showed major respect to each other. He handed them belts back because, he's going to get his own belts. And, Canelo earned those belts. And those were 2 warriors in the ring, bro. Shout out to Canelo. Shout out to Bud Crawford. All the media, everybody kept asking Bud, what's he going to be able to do with Canelo's power leading up? And Bud knew the confidence that he had that he was going to beat Canelo. And I'm not going to lie, from a boxing perspective, I had just been seeing who Canelo had been fighting previously, and I knew that he ain't never seen nothing like Terence Crawford in front of him as far as skill-wise, boxing IQ, a technician. And, the pay differential was crazy in this fight. I think Canelo made about $200 million, maybe Bud made $10 million or something crazy in the disparity. But, hey, we also figured out now that we are never going to see Canelo Alvarez versus David Benavidez. Like, that is not happening at all. David Benavidez hung around at 168 as long as he could to try to get that fight with Canelo. I think we all see now, based on Canelo's age and what, the outcome of what just happened with him and Terence Crawford, we're not going to see that. But yeah, shout out to Terence Bud Crawford out of Omaha, Nebraska. This has been legendary. This has been the writing on the wall. His legacy is now stamped up there with the likes of Floyd Mayweather, Sugar Ray Leonard, Roy Jones Jr., Andre Ward, all of the great lightweights and welterweights that have come, shout out to this young man, overcoming a troubled childhood and now undisputed in one of boxing's most legendary fighters in the history of the sport. He went up there and he captured against all odds. He went out there and he took the belts from Canelo. Shout out to Bud Crawford. Shout out to Canelo for making a great fight. Like, comment, and subscribe if you want me to keep doing this boxing content. As always, say no more.